By the early 1980s, I had been working for GE for about 6 years, and I had done a lot of trips to California and the two trips to Brazil and South America. Uh, I had accumulated quite a lot of frequent flyer miles, and somehow I heard that the TWA had a deal uh, with their passengers that for a certain amount of mileage, which I had achieved, I was entitled to take a trip around the world, uh, business class, if I took a companion and paid uh, the fee for the companion, my ride would be free. As I recall, the amount I had to pay for the companion accompanying me, in this case, of course, it would be Babe, was about $4,000. So here it sounded like a great deal. We had the time, we had the money, uh, and we had the interest. Not only that, but we were in our 60s and we were healthy and strong enough to undertake such a trip. So uh, I arranged with TWA for us to take a trip, and we figured out which way we would like to go around the world. And our plan was to go first to Italy, uh, and the rest of the trip, as you will see as we go along, lasted for 9 weeks. Uh, it was interesting that we had to take clothing for cold weather and warm weather, so we needed a lot of luggage to go with us, but that was a nuisance to have to transport it. But you'll see how we handled it. The first part of our trip was to go to Rome. We had been in Italy a couple of times before, but we had never spent time driving around by ourselves, and we had not been to Sicily, which we thought would be interesting to see. It was We were supposed to be going business class, but there was an opening in first class when we got to the TWA plane, so they put us in first class, and that was a real new experience for us and made the long trip to Italy very comfortable because our seats reclined just like into beds, and we had anything we wanted to drink and fine dinner before we went to sleep. So we started out by flying to Rome, but interestingly enough, uh, we didn't fly to Rome because Rome airport was closed on account of a snowfall. So the plane made a change, and they decided that they could land in Milan, and that's where we went to. Uh, it was perfectly all right with us. It was a comfortable flight, and we got got off in Milan and went to a hotel. We were taken to a hotel where we spent the rest of the night, and it was arranged that we would fly from Milan to Rome, which had cleared their airport by them the next day. When we got to Rome, we collected our belongings and rented a car and started off driving south. We were heading for Sorrento, but the roads were still pretty bad from the snowfall, and we had to stop at a little town whose name I don't remember overnight. We were the only guests at a motel, a hotel, more of an Italian inn than a motel. And we had dinner there and slept there and started the next day, continuing our journey south to Sorrento. We stayed in Sorrento for a couple of days, waiting for the weather to clear so we could take a short ferry ride over to the Isle of Capri, which was famous for the song of that name. It was on the Isle of Capri that I met her. Anyway, it was something that we wanted to do, but the weather never cleared enough to make it the trip possible. We on the way south, we went to see the ruins of Pompeii that had been overrun by lava from Vesuvius back around the Christ time. And we found that really very interesting because many of the homes had been covered by ash, but then cleaned out later on, and you could walk through it and see what life was like 2,000 years ago. Many of the walls had frescoes on them, and the floors were finished with marble. It was a beautiful sight to see and interesting for us. We continued going south and came to the end, almost the tip of Italy, where you got a ferry to go across to Sicily. We had planned to go to Sicily and spend a week there driving around the complete island and seeing whatever the guidebook said were interesting sights. And indeed it was. Going from city to city, there were many interesting things that we saw. And as a matter of fact, we went up the mountain to Mount Etna, which at that time was erupting. So we got to get close enough so we could see some of the eruptions, and that we thought was fantastic. We saw many interesting things in Sicily, including a stone village up at the top of a mountain that Sicilians would go to in the summertime because it was cooler there. The streets were so narrow that I couldn't turn around. When I got down into this stone village, the only way out was for me to back up. And it was a narrow road and very rocky, but I was able to do it. We continued around the island. I think the largest city on the west side was Palermo, and that was the home of the mafia, the Sicilian mafia. Anyway, it was an interesting week and very, very exciting. And the restaurants were interesting, and we got a good idea of what Sicily was like. When we finished our week in Sicily, we then had to drive back to Rome for the next stage in our trip, which was a visit to India. And we had been told that you couldn't really travel on your own there because the planes and other means of transportation were so irregular that you had to go with a tour, otherwise you'd never get through it. So we had arranged a tour, a 3-week tour, starting in Bombay, and it was called the Hempel Harris Tour, and it was really first class. After all, we were traveling first class on a plane, so we didn't want to do less in traveling with the tour, and we had arranged for this before we left, and we were set up to fly from Rome to Bombay. To tell you how long ago this was, I guess it's about 35 years. The city of Bombay no longer exists, at least in its name, because the name has been changed to Mumbai. But of course, in those days, it was known as Bombay. And we got on our TWA flight, executive class or business class, and flew from Rome to Bombay nonstop. Arriving in Bombay, we were taken to one of the finest hotels in Bombay. And interesting, we had been told that we should stay, there were different sections, and we were told to get the real flavor of the hotel, we should stay in the older section. And so we had asked for a room there, and when we were taken to it, we didn't like the looks of it, and we asked that it be changed and that we be taken to the new wing, which I'm glad we did because it was much, much more comfortable. One of the reasons that we were going there was because one of our friends who used to lead bridge weekends at the the old forest house, uh, had a had one of his pupils was a man who lived in Bombay, an Indian who lived in Bombay and was very hospitable, so that if any of the friends of our friend went to on a cruise or a trip around the world by boat, if they stopped in Bombay, they had been told and invited to call this gentleman, and he was very pleased to accept and have to dinner for these guests at his home, which was very luxurious. So when we got to Bombay, we called him. Uh, his name was one of the most common in India, Patel, and we told him who we were and who our common friend of both of us, the bridge player and bridge teacher, had suggested that we get in touch with him when and if we ever got to Bombay. He sounded great, and he said that he was occupied for the next few days. How long would we be in Bombay? And we said we were just starting a 3-week tour. He then suggested that when we got back at the end of the tour to Bombay, we call him, because he then would be able to take care of us at his home, and we could have dinner together. So we thanked Mr. Patel and said we'd see him in about 3 weeks, and we'd call when we returned. And we started on a Hempel Harris tour, which started in Bombay and went north along the west coast of India, heading for Srinagar and almost up in the Alps, the lower Alps of India. And we took about a week going up there. At one point, staying on a hotel that was a palace, really, that was built on a lake, and seeing all the sights, the big cities, the ancient ruins of temples. We took many pictures and postcards, and if you visit me sometime in my next abode, I'll be able to show them to you. Srinagar was a very interesting place. It was, at that time, practically a war zone between India and Pakistan, both of them claiming ownership of that small city. But when we were there was no fighting, and we were able to see the sights and do the things that normal visitors would do. From Srinagar, we made a right turn going along the northern border of India and heading for the Ganges River and the famous city where the Taj Mahal had been built. And the Taj Mahal was one of the seven wonders of the world. And of all of them that I've seen, that was the most memorable and and most worthy of the name of one of the seven wonders of the world. This was a building that was built by around the 14th century by a pasha, a prince of India who had lost his wife that he loved. When I say lost, his wife died, and he had been very much in love with her, and he wanted to build a shrine for her. It wasn't a temple or a palace. It was simply a building to commemorate this lovely lady that he had loved. And on approaching it, you come through a dark, like an opening in the wall, and when you make a turn and you see there's light in front of you, there is this beautiful building about 500 feet from you with a shallow pool between you and the building, and this beautiful white building shining with its towers and turrets. Absolutely breathtaking. Again, I'd like to show you a couple of pictures of it. We were very impressed with our visit to the Taj Mahal, and we spent a whole day visiting, walking, seeing the building, and it was especially moving because the Taj Mahal doesn't have a significant reason for being. I mean, it's not a church, it's not an office building, it's not a capital of some state. All it is a beautiful demonstration of the love of a man for a woman who, after she died, built this beautiful site for people to remember her, and become one of the seven wonders of the world. We enjoyed it tremendously, and after visiting the Taj Mahal, we walked around the streets of the town, and we saw people working on stone objects that they were making into various small boxes and plates, etc., of stonework, and we bought a beautiful round disc that was supposed to be used as a tabletop, and as a matter of fact, we still have it. It was about, I would say, 18 inches in diameter, a round disc that was supposed to be put on wooden legs to be used as a table. But somehow it was shipped to us and we never made the table. It was so beautiful, we just have had it lying around as decoration for the last 20, 25 years. And as a matter of fact, it has recently been crated safely by Bob and is being shipped off to Longview up in Ithaca, and we'll have the pleasure of looking at it sitting at some table up there. This was made by a man sitting at a little machine that he had probably made or bought from a relative, and it was powered by a foot pedal, and I can't tell you how beautiful this marble tabletop is. Someday, if you come to visit me, you'll see it. The next stop after the Taj was a visit south and below the Taj to the Ganges River, which is one of the great rivers of India and considered very important as far as the religious people, the Hindus of India. As a matter of fact, it's considered a holy river and considered to be absolutely pure. I don't think people drink it, but they are not afraid to walk in it and swim in it and use it for washing their clothes. So when you come to the river, the thing that hits your eyes most is the fact that there are thousands of people near the shoreline, and a lot of them are bathing themselves, and some are washing clothes. And the way they wash clothes is to bang them on rocks, swing the wet clothes on rocks in the river, and then they're taken out and laid on the grass on hills alongside of the river to dry. I didn't see any soap being used, but the river is said to be pure, and people are satisfied that that's a good way to have their clothes laundered. The other significant use of the river, alongside of the river at any rate, are funeral buyers. So there are huge piles of wood stacked up on shore, And when somebody dies, they burn the body alongside the river until it's on piles of wood until the body is burned and there are only ashes left. Then the ashes are taken and put on pieces of leaves, large leaves, and with candles are floated down the river. See, that's where you see the cremated bodies floating by. The way it's done so beautifully and with so much solemn thought and of the purity of the river, it's a nice way to end a person's life. As a matter of fact, we did go out on the river in the early evening and were given candles that we could place on little rafts and float away from us down the river with any thoughts that we might have or prayers that would go with the candles. All in all, a very significant time. It's amazing to see men whose purpose in life and whose job it is to gather the wood which are cut from trees and built up on the shore and used to make the bonfires that burn up the bodies that have died. That was a very memorable moment. We have some pictures that are now packed away, but perhaps when we unpack them, we can add these to these words so you'll see what life on the Ganges River looked like. That's the end of this portion of my talk because we are leaving India for a little while to go to Nepal, Kathmandu, and a preserve up there which is called Tiger Tops.